All right, I want to start here first. I want to start here with the, and I think the most interesting story of the year. Like people say, oh, the Cavs struggles, and obviously Houston and Golden State and what they're doing. But I think the most interesting story of the year, honestly, is the Spurs and what that situation is like. Kawhi Leonard, the best player, of course, has played in only 9 games this year. He was reportedly supposed to come back a few weeks ago, then didn't come back, and now he's back in New York rehabbing his injury, allegedly. There's some infighting about, talk about him not being happy in San Antonio and whether he trusts the team and with handling his injury, his quad injury, whatever. This I know this discussion started with you and I recently on Twitter because I made a mention I think Sunday or Monday because we're talking about Coach of the Year, and obviously you can talk about Mike D'Antoni, you can talk about Dwayne Casey, Nick McMillan, and others, and and I've said that this coaching job that Popovich has done this year without Kawhi Leonard in the lineup and with a bunch of rotation players, sans Marcus Aldridge, of course, that the fact that the Spurs are actually a top 4 seed, another 5 now because Utah just won last night. Now that Utah's number 4, that's insane. Now that the Spurs are still have the head above water in spite of everything that's happened this year, that Popovich should at least get some consideration for Coach of the Year because this is one of the better coaching jobs he's done in his career. Now, I got some pushback from you over the weekend. Explain to the folks why you disagree with my take.
Well, everything you said is 100% right, by the way. So let's establish that, first of all. It's not like what you're saying is incorrect. But where I think that Popovich almost disqualifies himself from this is everybody knows that there's a clash between him and Kawhi Leonard. There has to be, right? And people were talking about that even last season. They said when Popovich was getting up and saying he's the most distant star player that he's ever had and he can't get through to him and things of that nature. So I would put the blame on him, Popovich, as to why Kawhi Leonard's not playing. Now, all this other drama that's hit the roof since, the players only meeting with and then Manu coming out and Parker really coming out. I mean, what Manu said, I think, was a little bit misinterpreted, but what Parker said was totally egregious. It set that whole situation back because even if he was, if there was a slight chance that he was going to be playing, this is Kawhi Leonard, that you can throw that out the window. So the reason that I would say that I wouldn't give any consideration to Popovich getting the Coach of the Year, even though he's done a very good job with what he's had to work with, he's the reason he is working with a depleted roster. That's why I think he's... And there's so many other good candidates out there too. You just talked about Utah. I mean, Snyder's name isn't even mentioned. Look at what he's had to work with.
There's a lot of great cases made here. I mean, even the guy in Portland, Terry Stotts, I mean,
sure.
There's a lot of names you mentioned here. And D'Antoni, again, I mean, he can win it again. I mean, he's overachieved.
McMillan, you mentioned McMillan. Brad Stevens out in Boston. Mm-hmm. Your boy in Miami, Spoelstra, once again, very impressive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but again, this Spurs team, like, they're not, as you're seeing, they're not that impressive without Kawhi Leonard. And, I mean, and getting LaMarcus Aldridge to buy in again. LaMarcus Aldridge, who at this time last year, we were talking about this guy possibly being traded.
But once again, sorry, God, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No. Go ahead.
But once again, that was Popovich's doing. When they brought Aldridge over, they didn't run anything. Surely, because they used to have heated playoff battles with each other. When LaMarcus Aldridge was a legitimate MVP candidate, they did sweet FA in getting him in those spots that he needed to be. And then what it looked like, because if they could have traded him, they would have in this past off season. But they realize there's absolutely market for him, so they're stuck with this contract. They've got to do something with him. And, surprise, surprise, they actually started running some sets for him where they got him in his sweet spot, and he's back to being an all-star player. What does that tell you about Popovich?
Well, it tells you he's probably manipulative, number one, but it also tells you he's a damn good coach and knows how to get the best out of his players.
He also knows how to get the worst out of them, too.
I mean, you know what's funny though, and I'm surprised no one in the media said this. Like, I kind of compare this whole situation to like Bill Belichick in New England now. Like, all of a sudden, like we praise these guys for years, like, and rightfully so. I mean, I mean, I view Bill Belichick as the best coach of all time in the NFL, and I actually view Popovich as probably the best coach of all time in basketball history, even with Phil Jackson. I've been saying that for years. And yet, this last calendar year, you've seen both guys come on the fire a little bit now. Like, you've seen Belichick all of a sudden in the last, the end of the season last year, and certainly after the Super Bowl with the way he handled the Malcolm Butler thing.
Right.
Also him coming on fire a little bit. Now you see kind of the same thing with Popovich to some degree. Not as bad as Belichick, but certainly now with the Kawhi thing going on, and even last year with Aldridge, which wasn't a big national media story, but it was definitely a situation that could have gotten worse had there been more gas on the fire. But it's funny now in this era in 2018 how even the best coaches of all time are not immune to league-wide criticism. Sure,
but here's what I've come to a little bit of a conclusion with, because a few years ago I would not have disputed if somebody said, Gregg Popovich, one of the greatest coaches of all time. How much of it was it Tim Duncan keeping that locker room together?
Well, I'm sure it was, but there's also stories too that we've learned through these recent years that even Tim Duncan and Pop through the years have had their issues, but again, it's the way it's handled. It's handled indoors, closed doors.
Not anymore, it isn't. Apparently, players only meeting, and this is why I think that with that players only meeting, that was similar to you've seen the movie A Few Good Men, right? Of
course.
And the entire thing that they had to get Jessup, Jack Nicholson, the character Jack Nicholson was playing, was did he order a code red on on Santiago? And that's what it feels like, that he's called his players to do a code red on Kawhi Leonard. I'm laughing because it's so ridiculous, but it sounds so accurate, because you brought up Belichick, and I'm glad you did bring up Belichick, and for more reasons than one. But the biggest comparison between Popovich and Belichick, the biggest reason to compare these guys, is the fact that they have almost complete control over their franchises. If Popovich did not want them to have a players-only meeting, it wouldn't have happened, let alone for it to be leaked to the press the way that it did, like within hours of it happening. Nearly every single detail of it was out there. That's why I think he's behind it. And if he's behind it, then I can't possibly give him any credit for semi-rectifying a situation that he's caused.
Well, let me ask you this. What do you make of the Kawhi situation? I find that story getting weirder and weirder and weirder as the days goes on. And by the way, just for the record, the Spurs and Kawhi can sign to a Supermax extension this summer. So my theory is this: is that I think we're gonna have more details about this sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I'm very careful in terms of, because no one knows a player's body better than the player. You would know this. Yeah. You're a health professional. Only the best doctor is the individual themselves. They know when their body's right. And we're seeing too many examples, whether it's Grant Hill, whether it's Anthony Hardaway, or even Isaiah Thomas, the mini Isaiah Thomas, not the Detroit Pistons Isaiah Thomas. Where
not the GOAT.
Yeah, clearly not. Where they've come back too early, and they've been forced into it. So I don't know what his body is. So players should always be given the benefit of the doubt in those circumstances. And for the team led by Popovich, because he is the figurehead of that team, he's not just a coach, he runs that organization essentially. For him to be now getting this kind of pressure, I don't think there's any chance of him re-signing there for the Supermax. I think there's a very good chance that he gets traded, especially when there's teams like Boston that can offer them draft picks, offer them young players. Then they would be more than happy to take Kawhi Leonard off their hands.
Well, I think we got to figure out whether Kawhi Leonard actually wants to even be in San Antonio. I mean,
that's what I mean. I think he's gone. I think that.
Do you think he wants to leave?
Yeah, I think him, and it's quite obvious that even though he's quiet, that him, and this is why I laugh when they say that LeBron James, one of his top spots that he could land is San Antonio. That would never happen. But
I think that's all just cute.
Oh, of course. That would never happen. But the thing is that Popovich has an ego the size of Belichick's, and it's clear that he's come across somebody that he can't control, and I don't even think you need to control someone like Kawhi Leonard because he doesn't do anything wrong on the court. He doesn't play out of control. He doesn't play with an ego. He plays like he wants to win, and it's just funny that the locker room ego has spilled out, and quite honestly, Popovich looks terrible in all of this.
Yeah, I don't know yet. I don't know because on one hand, you can say that, and I wouldn't say you're necessarily wrong. But on the other hand, we don't know enough about on the Kawhi side. Like,
well, what has Leonard done wrong?
Kawhi is being led, or he's like his agent's his uncle.
Yeah,
you know, and we've seen that dynamic before in the past, and it hasn't been very pretty. With Derrick Rose and his brother being his mouthpiece, and I've always been very skeptical about family being involved in business, regardless of whether or not they're actually legitimate people to be running things like that. But still, I've always been very, you know.
But what has Kawhi Leonard done so far that has been wrong in this circumstance?
What is what I'm saying? Well, the only thing we've heard from Kawhi is that he had that press conference. Well, not press. Well, I guess press conference, I'm gonna call it, where he was saying that he wants to be here and he wants to come back as soon as possible and this and that. But it was typical Kawhi Leonard speak. You know, Kawhi is very quiet. He doesn't very speak out much. But that's what he said. I mean, I find it stranger. It was very strange to see Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker in the same week, kind of sort of like underhandedly, sort of throw some jabs at Kawhi. Not like where it's obvious, but it was.
Well, Tony Parker's definitely was. Manu's, I think Manu's was just I understand what Ginobili was saying when he was saying, look, I've got to, from an individual standpoint, I have to prepare for him or expect him to not return, and I have to hold myself accountable. I get that. But when Tony Parker gets up there and, I would have thrown a croissant at him for that one. That's ridiculous because he's, what kind of leadership is that? And what benefits do you get? And once again, do you really think that's coming? If Popovich didn't want that kind of sentiment to get out there, do you think it gets out there?
That's true. Well, if Kawhi does get traded,
yeah,
what's the best fits? Well, first of all, I'll always say Miami because I wanted Miami because I'm just being greedy. But What is the best for Kawhi Leonard in terms of basketball fit? Like you mentioned Boston, which I guess.
Well, they have so much they can offer them in terms of draft picks and young players. You've got Boston, you've got teams like Chicago. It depends what he wants. Does he want to go into a ready-made situation or does he want to rebuild? I would like to see that.
Where?
Sorry?
Where would you like to see him go to?
Well, I like to see him go. Indiana. I think that would be nice. Him playing because remember the Pacers originally drafted him and he was traded for George Hill. But I would like to see him team up with Oladipo and let's see how they can build together because but I'm not sure if the Pacers have enough to offer San Antonio still. I haven't really thought about Miami is a good opportunity. What about say New Orleans?
Well, I'll tell you what. If you go to New Orleans, that immediately helps the Anthony Davis narrative out for them. Like he definitely won't want to leave now.
Right.
I mean, as soon as he's healthy, of course. But yeah, I mean, of course, you hear typically the Lakers and all that. I mean, whatever.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Lakers are kind of they've turned into the Cowboys, and everybody their game gets. It's like hot stove. Not the Cowboys. Sorry, the Yankees. Every free agent, every potential trade, it's always the Yankees.
Well, I mean, they are the most one of the three most important franchises in sports. I mean, Lakers are, and that is true. I mean,
but do you think Kawhi Leonard would be interested in that situation?
Well, I mean,
we don't know. We don't know.
I will say this: they're a lot more stable in the front office now than they were in the last couple of years. That helps his case.
That's not saying much, though. That's not saying much.
Well, I mean, you got Magic Johnson there.
Yeah, but I mean, like a couple of years ago, that was probably the worst run franchise in all of basketball.
What's what I'm saying? Well, and now they're not.
What about Philly? Wouldn't it be sweet if he went to Philly?
That makes sense, especially if Ben Simmons stays as the point. Yeah, shoot, Philly. God, Philly's good, aren't they? God, that's fun to watch.
I think they're a sneaky contender to make the finals.
Sneaky?
To make the finals. Yeah, no one's talking about them potentially making the finals.
I think with everything in the Eastern Conference going on right now, with Boston being unhealthy, Toronto being a little bit like tight butt again, and Cleveland not.
That's one way to put it.
Well, I mean, it is what it is. It's funny.
They are climbing up though. That's true. They're in playoff mode. Kyle Lowry's.
Well, I'll tell you. I'll say this much about Toronto, and fair or unfair, in a span of 2 weeks and 2 games against the Cavaliers, they've gone from like being the favorite in the Eastern Conference to all of a sudden we're doubting them again.
Yeah, look, the difference is they're doing it at the right time of the year, even though it's at the tail end of the regular season. It's not the playoffs. I'd rather them get this out of their system now and wake up now before they lose their first 2 home games in a playoff series against the Cavs. I think they have improved. They have absolutely improved, and no one has ripped on the Raptors more than I have in the last 2 years. Believe me.
Me either.
But the way they have played this regular season has surprised me and has impressed me, and I'm glad to see it. I think they are capable of anything, and some days they remind me of the 2011 Mavericks. Remember, prior to the 2011 Mavericks, everyone laughed at them for choking and not being able to play big games or big playoff series, and they will have to answer that question come playoff time. But that wouldn't surprise me if they made it to the finals and even won the championship. It wouldn't totally shock me. It also wouldn't shock me if they were bounced in the second round.
I mean,
I wouldn't be putting any money on them.
Well, they won last night. They beat Boston last night. So I said on my Unfiltered podcast yesterday that all of a sudden the Cavaliers, again, they're the boogeyman for the Raptors. But I will say this, the number 1 seed, they're gonna draw either Miami, Milwaukee, Washington. All 3 teams are gonna miss you, obviously. But I don't know. All year I've been saying this that I think Toronto. I think Toronto is better than everybody in the Eastern Conference except Cleveland because of LeBron. I think that you look at the Raptors, and I said all year long, even people who doubted me, I've said all year that, well, this year they feel different. They feel more focused. They feel more have a little bit of an edge. But again, it all comes down to what Kyle Lowry you're going to see in the postseason. That's where I'm concerned. Is because if Kyle Lowry has a bad game 1 in the first round, that's all you're going to hear for the next 3-4 days after the game 2 is that, oh, God, Kyle Lowry is doing the same thing again, coming out smaller than mini-me.
Sure. No, it's totally accurate. I mean, how many years have we seen it?
A lot. Yeah.
It's been a lot, man.
Look, I think they're better in Boston, even with Kyrie, personally.
Oh, no, if you've got a healthy Kyrie Irving and you've got Jaylen Brown and you're healthy as well, and you've got Al Horford and you've got Tatum, that's enough. I think Boston...
Well, how do we know that Jaylen Brown will be playoff Jaylen Brown this year? How do we know that? We don't know that.
Well, I put it this way, I've got more trust in him than I do Kyle Lowry in the playoffs.
Wow, that's saying a lot then. If that's the case, then okay.
I've got more trust in Tatum than I do in Kyle Lowry at this point in the playoffs. Have we seen anything from Kyle Lowry in the playoffs?
He has moments. He'll have a bad game here, and then this is when you write him off. Then he bounces back and has a huge game here. I mean,
I've seen him have good quarters. I haven't seen him have a dominant. These are really dominant players. That's not really fair.
Well, I will say this. In that Heat series 2 years ago in 2016, when that Game 7, he had a huge Game 7 against us.
But
I will say that.
I remember that series quite. I watched every game of that series intently because that was really the last dominant performance we saw from Dwayne Wade in the playoffs. How many injuries did you guys have?
We had Whiteside, who was out, who missed most of the series, which is huge, obviously. I think we lost. Did we lose Luol Deng in that series too? Also, I believe.
Yeah. I think Dragic was injured for a few games as well.
Yeah, he played, but he was injured. I love Dragic, dude. By the way, Goran Dragic, for the record, is now creeping up my top 5 all-time favorite Heat players.
I'm going to hear this. Give me your top 5 Heat players. I know Glenn Rice is number 1.
There you go. Obviously Wade.
Okay.
UD.
Okay.
Love UD.
That's 3 already.
Yeah. I'm very favorable to Grant Long. He was playing the Heat.
Oh wow, with the goggles, right?
He was the original UD for UD.
And he had the goggles, right? The Horace Grant goggles.
Yeah, he did, right? And
so that's
Dragic now.
Really? I mean, so ahead of guys like Shane Battier?
Well, these are guys.
Alonzo Mourning doesn't make your top 5 list?
No. I mean, it's hard, but Dragic is this. He's tough as nails, dude. Like he gets
replace Grant Long with Alonzo Mourning, and I won't complain about the list.
I mean, I know he got in the I know he made the All-Star team because of Kevin Love missing and roster spots not being filled, because people were injured. But I don't think you understand how happy I was that he actually made the All-Star team this year.
Right. But I'm not letting you off the hook this easy. If you replace Grant Long with Alonzo Mourning, I'll be happy with your list.
Well, Grant Long is a guy that he was the heart and soul of the team for a long time before Zoe got here. You can remember, I am obsessed with the early Heat teams before Riley got here.
Yeah, but Alonzo was he was so underappreciated in terms of MVP caliber players.
Oh no doubt. Oh, nationally, yeah, of course. He's appreciated down here. I'll tell you that right now.
Well, apparently not. You've got Grant Long heading to one of your favorite list.
Dude, Grant Long was great. I mean, I love Ronnie Cycli.
Yeah, okay. Steve Smith, Brian Shaw.
To this day, Matthew, the worst trade in Heat history was trading Steve Smith to Atlanta for Kevin Willis and Billy Owens. Oh, was it Billy Owens that trade too? Also, no. It was a Cycli trade, but for Kevin Willis, in '94. To this day, I have not forgiven Shafel Cunningham for that.
Okay. I think that's fair enough. Kevin Willis was an all-star in Atlanta, right?
Yeah, he was borderline all-star. He was like top rebounder in the league next to Rodman. Him and Rodman always 1 and 2 every year. But my point was they had a nice little core going, with Cycli, Rice, and Smith, and they had their first winning season, and they pulled the rug from under them literally the very next year. Like
I could see people getting upset with that trade. That was a pretty dumb trade because Smitty was he was only young, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. I mean, he was hurt a lot too. Don't get it. He got hurt a lot, but still, I've not forgiven Louis Shafel and Billy Cunningham to this day, 24 years later, with that trade. To this day, thank God Pat Riley saved this team.
But the guy he brought in straight away doesn't even make your top 5. I can't believe that. Alonzo Mourning's in my top 5 players of all time, and he doesn't make it.
No, well, it's not a knock on him. It's personal favorites, personal people I connected with heavily.
So you relate more with Goran Dragic than you do with Alonzo Mourning?
You know what? I'll put Zoe 5, Dragic 6. Okay.
All right. Okay. As long as Alonzo gets out of that list, I don't care who gets found.
But my larger point is Dragic has moved up the list pretty fast.
Okay.
It's my larger point.
That's fair. That's fair enough. I'll be satisfied with that.
I look at the Eastern Conference though. The Eastern Conference is so interesting. Like we know the 8 teams now. The 8 teams that are going to be in the playoffs already, it's all set. They all clinched. Milwaukee, Washington, Miami, Indiana, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Boston, Toronto. I think this Eastern Conference playoff this year, because of Cleveland being so mediocre, really. I mean, look, the 48-30, obviously they're going to win 50 games this year again, but the fact that Cleveland's very mediocre and there's a clue that there's a possibility that this could be the year you can catch LeBron and the Cavs. This Eastern Conference playoff run might be the most interesting Eastern Conference playoff run we've had in, I would dare say, since Jordan's last year in Chicago.
Oh no!
You don't think so?
No, 2011. You had Derrick Rose was the MVP.
Yeah, but it was just 3 teams though. It was Miami, 4 teams: Orlando, Miami, Cleveland, and Miami, Orlando,
Boston,
Chicago, and Boston. That's it. Yeah. That's the only 4 teams you were considering to even make any noise. That's it.
Okay.
You have 8 teams here. Like I can make a case for look. I can look right now. If the playoffs start today, Toronto and Milwaukee will be the first round series, 1-8. Okay, I can make a case for Milwaukee pushing it to 7 games and maybe win that series. Washington and Boston, I can make a case for Washington to win that series too. Miami and Cleveland, while I would say Cleveland will win that series, obviously because of LeBron, Miami gives them fits.
Oh, especially with Wade back, yeah.
Yeah.
Here's the difference. I get what you're saying in terms of the competitive balance within the conference themselves.
Right.
But
That's what I mean. That's what I mean.
but 2011, you had 3 legitimate NBA contenders, which is so rare for one season in the
Yeah,
Eastern Conference.
but the problem with that was that most people still thought Miami would figure it out that year. It was still the idea that you got LeBron, Wade, and Bosh. And look, the roster sucked by the way. That, beyond those 3 guys and maybe Mike Miller and UD, the rest of the roster sucked. Okay? I remember they had Mike Bibby save that team.
Right.
But otherwise, the entire conference, in terms of the balance, like,
yeah.
Because of Cleveland not being so dominant this year, the optics now have shown you that in the first round alone, there could be some chaos in the first round alone, potentially.
Sure. But what I wish would have happened, and we saw this in the first couple of months, is the Eastern Conference actually elevate to how good Cleveland was playing. Because Cleveland came out pretty good without Isaiah Thomas. Then Cleveland dropped off, and you saw the rest of the conference. So it wasn't a fact of everybody catching up to Cleveland this year. It was more Cleveland coming back to the pack because they weren't that good. So I can't think of. Look, I'm trying to. I hope I'm wrong with this because I want to see a great NBA Finals. I can't see one legitimate contender out of that group. Not one.
What do you mean?
Like whoever makes the NBA Finals out of the East, unless they get like a super lucky break in terms of injuries or matchups, and they end up playing like say Oklahoma City or Utah or something crazy like that, I can't see any Eastern Conference team being a serious contender in the NBA Finals.
Oh, no. I think you are correct there. I think, Toronto, you still talking about Toronto. Obviously, Boston's not really fully healthy. Boston might be the only team I think really that can. I mean, obviously Cleveland because of LeBron, but Boston's the only other team I can see maybe giving Houston fits. That's it, because defensively they're really good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm with you. Like, because I still think I think you and I assume that Golden State will figure it out.
No.
Wow.
There's no assumption there whatsoever.
Oh, wow.
They have not proven, even though they've had a pretty good run at the 2 out of 3 titles they've won within one game of winning 3 in a row. I have not really seen them be challenged, and the one time they were challenged, they blew a 3-1 lead. And they have gotten such a lucky break during this period of other teams getting injured, whether it's Kawhi Leonard or their first championship run with Kyrie Irving, Kevin Love. Every team they played on that run to the title had injuries at the point guard, whether it was Drew Holiday or Mike Conley or Patrick Beverley, and then, of course, Irving in the finals. So now all of a sudden there's quite a few teams in the West that have gotten so much better that they're going to face an absolute dogfight every step of the way, and now ironically they're the team that's a bit banged up. So I'm not assuming anything. Even if they were healthy, I wouldn't assume anything. Potentially, they may get Oklahoma in the first round. You got the standings in front of you. If my memory serves me correct, Oklahoma's only 1 game or half a game out of the 7th seed. They could easily wind up playing Golden State in the first round. So Golden State could have to go through Oklahoma in the first round, and then potentially Portland, who is playing incredibly well right now since the All-Star break, and then Houston. All 3 teams could knock them off.
I don't know if knock them off, but I think the larger point is it can actually. Well, without Steph Curry being in the first round, I think that opens the door. But I think overall, still, I just think Golden State's bored. I don't want to bored. I mean, look, the banged up, yes, but I think remember we discussed a couple years ago with Miami in the 4th year. That 4th year is tough, man. I mean, when you go to the finals 3 years in a row, that 4th year is tough. There's a reason why there's only been 3 teams in NBA history that's ever gone to the finals 4 years straight.
So let me ask you this. You brought up Miami in their 4th year being bored. They were also banged up too. Ray Allen wasn't the same player. Battier wasn't the same player. Chris Bosh and Dwayne Wade, especially Dwayne Wade, weren't the same players.
Yeah.
Now, if you would put Miami in a loaded Western Conference, do you think they would have made the playoffs made the finals in their 4th year?
You mean based on this year's Western Conference?
Yeah. So if you put that Miami team with all the context of making the finals 4 straight years, you put that Miami Heat team from 2014 in this year's You put them in Golden State's spot. Number 2, would you predict or would you pick them to make the finals in that situation?
I think it'd be very hard to, honestly, because if you believe, look, it all depends on the optics. Do you believe what Houston's selling? Do you believe that James Harden could be the same guy in May and June?
This is I actually do. I can explain why. It's because Chris Paul complements him. Chris Paul has done an incredible job, and once again, I've been really critical of Chris Paul, especially in the playoffs. But he's done a really good job of filling the holes, and this is what great players are meant to do. They don't make teams adapt to them. They adapt to those teams, and they make players better. Chris Paul has absolutely done that. And when you watch Houston play Golden State, it's the only time you'll ever see Golden State slow the pace down. Because they cannot keep up with this Golden State team. There's so many scorers on there. Think about it.
Right.
Sorry, go.
And there's something to be said about the record with Chris Paul and Harden together. They've lost only 2 games together, 1 game together on the court.
It's insanity. It's absolute insanity. And I look at Golden State. How do they slow all these guys down? They can't. I don't think they can, unless if there's another catastrophic injury. But what are the odds they luck out again? Golden State and their biggest rival gets injured again.
And I mean, last year was such a weird thing because of Kawhi getting hurt in Game 1 in the Western Conference Finals. That was definitely a weird situation because I still think to this day we were robbed of a
absolutely
of a great Western Conference Final.
I'm
not saying the Spurs would have won the series, but that would have gone 6-7 games probably with a healthy Kawhi.
Of course, because Kawhi Leonard makes such a huge impact defensively, and he was playing so well offensively that year. It was disappointing. That's why I think Zaza should be suspended for about 50 games. Yes. And there's no way that wasn't intentional.
No, I'm with you there. That was definitely borderline intentional. Definitely, you have to consider it no matter what. So if I ask you right now, Matthew, if today, April 5th, if it's April 6th for you now, I think, right?
That is correct, yeah.
14 hours ahead of me. If I had to ask you right now, who's winning the West right now? You say who?
I hate going back.
A prediction.
Yeah, I hate going away from my picks, especially when I'm still confident of the picks. So I wouldn't surprise me if Oklahoma still won it. You know, that wouldn't shock me.
Because you were a big OKC does this shit every. I can't put up a pulse on OKC yet. This has been a streaky year. You know, where they figure it out and then they go down again for a little bit, and then they figure it out again, and now they're back to last 10 games 5-5. I mean, this is a very weird team, but we can't write them off because they have 3 players that at moment's notice, especially in the playoffs, they can destroy you.
Right. The reason why I haven't jumped off that ship yet is because they play so well against good teams, great teams. The teams they're going to play in the playoffs. They play down to their competition. They lose to teams that they shouldn't. But if you gun to my head and I have to pick a team, it would be Houston to make the finals.
You're sold. Like you're bought into Houston now. What they're doing?
Yeah. I've been sold pretty much for most of the year. Not over Oklahoma, but I've had the last month. I've had to face facts, and they have played that much better. They are that much more consistent.
I'll tell you what. Let me tell you something right now, and this is good for the league for the record because we all assumed Golden State next 2-3 years.
Speak for yourself, buddy. When you say we all assumed.
Well, most people in the media, I'll admit, I was that way too. But the parodies work. This new CBA, you know, that's supposed to create parity in the league, it's starting to work. Like Golden State got lucky because that CBA was signed after they got Durant. But the parity in the league now is starting to work. It's starting to become a thing now. You know, the very fact that Houston is not only leading the Western Conference, they're up. And I know injuries play a part in this, but they're also 6 games ahead. Oh, by the way, Houston also missed James Harden part of the year too, and Chris Paul. Yeah. So you can't. The same excuse you used to Golden State. Houston has the same.
Oh, they can know. I don't want to hear any excuses for Golden State.
Oh no! Yeah. No excuses. No excuses. Like Steve Naismith says all the time on the ESPN. He's right. I don't give a crap. Curry's gone. Durant, you're the second best player in the world. Make it happen. Let's go.
Who's the best player in the world?
I mean, it is argued. I mean, I'm not gonna lie to you, but the idea of just of Houston being the number one seed and actually having a legitimate shot to win the title, and Golden State not even get to the finals. I mean, that's good for the league, really, because everybody assumed those Golden State had this league locked and barrel for the next 2-3 years, and not so fast.
Well, I've always look Golden State impressed me early on this year because of the evolution finally of Kevin Durant to play some defense, some consistent defense, and that now all of a sudden, because when they first all got together, I was like, okay, the obviously the greatest shooting team of all time. No one's ever going to dispute that with any legitimacy. But now they can play defense because you got Draymond Green, you got Klay Thompson, who's a pretty good defender, you got Sean Livingston, who's a pretty good defender. Iguodala can still give you good defense in spurts, not consistently though, but in spurts. But now all of a sudden they seem to. I'm not going to give them the pass of being bored, because they looked pretty into that. There was a good part of the season where Golden State and Houston were neck and neck, and Golden State looked like they were interested in getting home court advantage. And then Houston just blew them out of the water, and now all of a sudden they're going down. Oh, we're just bored. We don't care too much about it. But what this does remind me of a little bit is, you would remember this. You're a big basketball historian. The 2002 season with Sacramento and LA, and Sacramento picked up Mike Bibby. You mentioned Mike Bibby before, but they picked up Mike Bibby. I'm not comparing Mike Bibby to Chris Paul, but Mike Bibby was a perfect fit for that Sacramento Kings team. And Sacramento ran away with the regular season record, and of course everyone was just eyeing off those two. That was a real NBA Finals. It went 7, controversial series, but I'm looking at it that way too. I think that's what we're looking at.
And I'll say this before we go to the next topic. I'll say this real quick about this Houston situation. Do you understand the narrative change? If Mike D'Antoni not only beats Golden State this year, but wins the title this year, and given everything that we now, you and I know this already because we love the game. Like Mike D'Antoni is one of the biggest influential people in the last 15 years, sort of the NBA and what it is today, but does not have any rings to show for it. If Mike D'Antoni wins a title this year, given everything we know, everything that's gone on the last couple of years with him in his stints in New York and in LA, and then of course what he did in Phoenix, the narrative change of Mike D'Antoni's career flips on a dime if he wins the title this year.
It's not just him though; it's also James Harden.
Well, Harden's the obvious one, because also now we look at James Harden as a possible top 5 guard all time, 2 guard all time.
Well, he's knocking right on the door for that already. But I would go as far as to say that he because I ranked him, I think, 48th all time of the 3-point era, so number 48. I would be willing to consider him if he gets MVP and a championship this year to go along with the level that he's played with the last 2 seasons, instantly 30 to 35 player.
3 seasons actually. This is hard things going on 3 years now.
3 out of 4. The 2016 season was a down year for him. 2015 was the year that he came in second in the MVP voting.
Yeah,
but also Chris Paul.
Steph Curry. 16. What was the record that year in 16? I forgot.
That was the 8th seed. I don't know what their record was.
That's
maybe
right.
44.
That was the year. That also the year that was the year Dwight missed half the year.
Yeah, but still, didn't the coach get fired mid-season and Bickerstaff had to save him? Yeah. So that wasn't a very good season for him. But the season prior to that was fantastic. He probably by all intents and purposes should have been the MVP over Steph Curry.
Oh, yeah, I was making cases. I still gave it to Steph, but I remember on my old radio show, I was making cases for Harden all year long.
I think I probably would have voted for Westbrook that year, actually, even though they missed the playoffs. That's when he really started to unleash his...
Matthew, you know my rules. You know my rules.
You got rules.
You got to win 50 games.
Oh, do you really? Okay.
Last year was an anomaly because he was so good.
Right.
You average triple double in a year, you have to give consideration. But then again, they're not that much better than they were last year record wise. This season with better players.
Yeah, but the West has gotten a lot better though. That bottom end of the playoff seedings. You look at last year's playoff teams in the West. It was pretty much what San Antonio and Golden State with real dominant records, and then it was a free for all. Who was the third seed last year? Oh, it was Houston. But I mean, that was probably the weakest beyond those top three teams that we've seen the West in decades. So there was a lot of easy wins for Oklahoma. Whereas now, I mean, even outside of the top eight, I've got the numbers in front of me now. You got the Clippers at 42 and 36. You got Denver at 43 and 35, and they're not even probably going to make the playoffs. So it's harder to get 50 wins now than it definitely was last year.
By the way, we talked about Coach of the Year earlier in the podcast, and look, I can't even want to say this, but they probably won't make the playoffs anyway. But Doc Rivers.
Oh yeah, I think this is one of his best coaching performances.
You lose your two best players in the same calendar year,
and then all the same injury, but all the other injuries too, from Patrick Beverley, Gallinari to.
And there's still 2 games behind for the eighth speed. And they're not going to catch New Orleans, I think, but this to be in the conversation all year long.
Yeah,
losing Blake Griffin, losing Chris Paul, and still be able to keep your team within arm's length of 8 seed. That, I mean, I got to give credit there, man.
Yeah, you wanted to talk about LeBron and MJ, right?
You know what? Not so much LeBron and MJ, like, cause I'm burnt out by that conversation anyway. Look,
believe me, I am too.
It's not even about LeBron and MJ comparisons. It's more so like, why is FS1 still pushing this crap? Like, even ESPN stopped this conversation a long time ago. Like, you don't see ESPN First Take doing this every day. All of a sudden, that's what Skip and Shannon want to talk about every day is LeBron and Jordan bringing guys to prove their points. Like, they had Ice Cube and Clyde Drexler on the show 2 days ago, and
Ice Cube. He does a big three, I guess. Well, I don't want to sound too condescending with this, right? But
yeah, you do. I know where you're going, buddy.
No, I don't want to, but there's no other way for me to answer it.
I got you cornered, buddy.
No, I just think that the Skip and Shannon Sharp show is just it's just such elementary basketball. It's not a real conversation, and all it is hot topics, and neither of them can really substantiate their points. Because I've seen some of these clips too, and they come up with the dumbest reasons as to, like, okay, the latest one that I saw, and I'm sure there's been other ones since, but was LeBron James having the longest streak of double-digit games in NBA history now, which is all well and good, but how does that now ignite this conversation between him and Jordan?
What does that matter in the grander scheme? It's a great accomplishment. I'm not going to knock it, but what does that matter in the grander scheme?
But that point was never used as to why Jordan was better than LeBron. And also, if we're going to bring up double-digit point games, why are playoff games and NBA final games not included in that? Because this is a Miami Heat fan.
Well, don't do this. Don't do the game 4. Dallas
game
series.
4 of 2011. Do you remember how many points he scored in that game? Do you remember how many?
8 points, man. Come on.
Greatest of all time, 8 points. Outscored by J.J. Barea and Jason Terry. That's pretty dominant.
Look, I am still, even if they won 2 titles after that, I'm still trying to forget that series, dude. Thank you for reminding me again. Thanks.
Well, you know what? Blame Fox Sports 1 for just...
No, blame Skip Bayless, a sorry ass. By the way, First Take is actually a lot more watchable now because Skip's not there anymore.
Is it still overly political at every opportunity?
Only when it needs to be. Only when it needs to be in the topic. They've changed that now. It's only when it needs to be.
I remember when I was in Hawaii, every second it was about either Ezekiel Elliott or Colin Kaepernick. I was just like, come on, give me a real sporting clip.
It only comes up if, like, Kaepernick's in the news, or if, let's say, Eric Reed hasn't been signed to a team yet, and they bring it up the situation. Bear in mind, I'm not the political in this podcast, but the president himself interjected himself into the sports world. So, once outsiders start interjecting themselves in the sports world, it's a fair game.
I'm not sure if I buy into that. It doesn't need to be every single topic, though. And for a period of time, it was getting every.
They have come on that, definitely. They have come on. I mean, they're a lot more creative with their the topic list now, and to me, I'm not saying First Take. Look, debate shows are hit and miss for me, but First Take, at least now, without Skip, like, I love Stephen A. Smith, but I couldn't stand him with Skip Bayless. Like, you can't have two characters on a show, okay? One's fine.
Well, what are we doing right now? These are two characters.
Well, not Max. Not Max. No, Max is not a character. Max.
No. What are we doing? We're two characters.
Well, I mean, that's different. I mean, no way. You're the character of this podcast right now, not me.
I don't know if we get that far.
Man, come on. I'm just the fucking host.
No, look, it wasn't just First Take either, though. It was every show on ESPN, whether it was Around the Horn or whether it was Sports Center at 6 or whatever. There was just politics everywhere.
A new show of politics, but I agree. There was a liberal slant among most media, mainstream media. I agree with that.
It's not so much that it was just liberal, though. It was just people, typically watch sports, and they want to talk about sports because they want to watch sports. They don't want to be
And I actually agree with you there too, also. But if you're a Breitbart reader and you're reading sports on not Breitbart Sports for the record, Breitbart in general, the regular stuff,
yeah,
and they're talking about sports in the regular publication, that's fair game.
Well, but the difference is that's a website, right, as opposed to TV.
I guess you're right. I guess you're right. Yeah, I guess because ESPN is a more grander publication or TV,
That's an empire, though, because you're getting this garbage. Honestly, you're getting it during the actual telecast of games, not even the analysis of it. And so they can do what they want. It's their industry, but they can also reap the fine rewards of losing so many viewers.
True. Me personally, I just don't give a fuck what you talk about. As long as you're not offending anybody, I don't care. I'm a Second Amendment absolutist. I believe in free speech as long as you're not offending anybody. To me, I don't care.
I've given up on losing sleep about offending people because people might be offended just by listening to our show. Oh, your show, sorry, but this episode.
Said the word fuck? Yeah, probably.
Yeah, so by that extension, I mean, if people want to be offended because they don't like you or they don't agree with you or about things you've said about LeBron James or Popovich or whoever, Kawhi Leonard, they will find a way to be offended, and then because they're going to find a way to be offended, they'll use that against you, even though there is really no consistent basis as to their own lives or the people that they agree with. And I'm not caring about it.
Right. I'll say this much about the Jordan LeBron thing.
Yeah.
Look, to me, you asked me the question, who's the greatest of all time? It's still Jordan. It's not really a conversation for me more than anything else. My lone pushback has always been that you can't tell me it's not a conversation. No, it is a conversation. Okay, and LeBron has another 3, 4, 5, 6 years ahead of him to change the narrative. Also, if he wins a couple more titles, it's a conversation. Period. And you can't tell me otherwise. Not saying you, but people in general.
Well, look, I don't think it is a conversation anymore. I think it is a conversation if you want to say Magic's better than Jordan because they played the game so different. If you want to say that Wilt's better than Jordan, if you want to say Kareem's better than Jordan, those are all arguments that I will happily listen to. But when it comes to LeBron, I don't think you can legitimately make a point for him. The biggest thing that goes for LeBron is the longevity, which is fair enough, but but that's
the reason I get Tom Brady the love he does too over Montana because of longevity.
Right, but do you also? But okay, how many people say that Emmitt Smith is the greatest running back of all time?
Few.
Very few. If somebody says that it should be a debate between him and Barry Sanders or Jim Brown or Walter Payton, nobody's really taking that seriously when it comes to Emmitt Smith. He was a great player, don't get me wrong, but nobody's really thinking he's the greatest running back of all time. And how many people say that Muhammad Ali is not the greatest heavyweight champ of all time? He didn't have the most wins. He didn't have the most knockouts. So my point is, really with Jordan, here's the thing. Jordan played 15 seasons. Technically, he played 15 seasons, right? Second season, he played, 20 games, if that, and half of them he didn't start. The 95 season, he played 17 games, and then he had 2 seasons in Washington when he was 40 years old, or 39 and 40 years old. So he really, all his body of work came from 11 seasons. So, and that includes 6 championships, that includes 5 MVPs, 6 finals MVPs, how many scoring records, how many all defensive first teams, how many all NBA first teams. I mean, all his body of work, all his accomplishments came really from an 11-year period. That is and for LeBron to only now have a resume, 15 years, and then for you to say, well, he's still 3 or 4 years away. He's going to have to play 20 years, essentially doubling what Jordan played, in order to make it a conversation. I don't think that's. I can't buy that, because we're talking about the greatest of all time, and the greatest of all time has to include the peak, and the peak of Jordan was that much better than LeBron's. That's what I said.
I wouldn't deny that. There's no doubt about that. I wouldn't deny that at all. I'm just saying that my lone pushback is that it's not an argument. This you can still make an argument for it. I can still make an argument for Jordan. If I really wanted to, which I've done many times in 30 years, this for conversation's sake, I picked and prodded actually things about Jordan. You know, the era he played in and all that. You can pick and prod Jordan's career and be.
All right, so let's make it an argument then. So I want to hear this. What do you think is the biggest argument against Jordan being
this idea that the Eastern Conference has only been bad for the last 10, 15 years is bullshit. Okay, the Eastern Conference has been taking 8 seeds under 500 since 1991. Okay, and regularly too, for the record. Sans maybe 2 years in the late 90s when Indiana got really, really good, and New York and Orlando, and of course the Bulls made a run back. Sorry, buddy, what's wrong? Baby's crying a little bit.
No, you're fine.
Sans all that, the majority of the 90s of Jordan's peak years in terms of championships, the East was relatively mediocre at best.
Okay, so the biggest thing that I have to say to that, and I'll let you go soon because obviously you got your child to take care of.
I think he has a stinky diaper.
Oh, okay. The thing that I would say about that is it's relative, right? So the West wasn't top heavy all the way through to the number 8 seed as well. You had teams like the Clippers in 97 making in the playoffs with like 36, 37 wins. So in comparison as to why LeBron's gotten through and why people say the East is so pathetic now, comparison to what the West has been during his career, then that's a legitimate point, because everyone's asking, well, LeBron's made the finals, 7 years in a row, 8 years in a row? I can't even keep count. I think it's 7.
7 years in a row.
Okay, so whilst that's impressive, I don't think he would have done that in the West. Whereas Jordan, if you place Chicago in the West, I think they still make the finals every year that they made the finals in the East. If anything, I think the East was probably a little bit tougher in terms of the competition than what the West was during that time. Maybe a little bit. I mean, even way, it's a lot more balanced. It's a hell of a lot more balanced than what it is now.
It's a good argument, like I said, but. Again, like I said, the Eastern Conference, like people forget the Eastern Conference was mediocre in the 90s too, except like maybe 1 or 2 years. What's the other one I want to use against Jordan also? That no one, and again, this is not Jordan or LeBron's fault. It is what it is.
I want to hear it. No, it's fine.
Jordan has not faced the type of competition that LeBron's faced in the finals. Period.
Okay.
The Spurs or the Warriors in the finals that Jordan's ever faced.
Okay, well, there's a couple of things to counter that. And first of all, Jordan's never been on the same caliber teams that LeBron has been on either. All right, so Jordan...
No, whoa. The last 3 Bulls teams?
Yeah, sure. He played with 1 All-Star for 2 years.
You can argue... Wait, hold on. Wait. But you can argue that 96 and 97, especially, that the Bulls had the 2 best players in basketball.
Okay.
You can argue that. Jordan and Pippen. The 2 best. Not 2 of. The 2 best basketball players in the world.
No, I wouldn't go that far with Pippen.
I'm not saying he was, but I think you can argue that.
Well, I don't think that's really fair, though. I mean, how could you possibly put Pippen ahead of a guy like, say, Karl Malone?
Both sides of the court. I mean, Pippen was dominant on the defensive end of the court. Offensively was obviously dependent on, and that all depended on how much time Jordan gave him the ball, but Pippen
averaged like 18, 19 points in the finals against that wasn't dominant.
Yeah, but his job, but Pippen's job most of these finals was to guard the other team's best player. He guarded John Stockton in the Utah series.
Oh, that was Ron Harper, man. Come on, no, that was Harper that got that assignment. Look, I get what you're saying.
Yes, but lockdown, it wasn't Jordan, it was Pippen.
Yeah, no. At that age, Jordan was still all NBA first team defensive.
Oh yeah,
by the way. So it's not like he was slacking on that end of the court, even at the age of 35 in the 98 season. But getting back to the original point where you're saying that Jordan's never gone through a team like, say, the Golden State Warriors, or the Spurs, I can't give you that he really went through a team of Hall of Famers with that Spurs in 2013. Duncan was how old? 35 in 2013? Parker was playing with a torn quad. Remember the torn quad that he's now using as ammunition for why Kawhi Leonard should be playing?
Yeah.
Manu Ginobili was also getting up there in age. Kawhi Leonard wasn't even an all-star that year. So I don't buy that as being a super team. And they're all in their prime? Absolutely, it's a super team. But they weren't anywhere near to all being in their prime. Actually, none of these players were in their prime, except for the, I hate to bring this up because you might get nightmares again, Danny Green. But then,
why do you? That is two. Oh God!
Imagine LeBron playing against Danny Green. 2011 LeBron going up against 2013 Danny Green. But getting back to also the other point is Jordan, in terms of playing with all stars, he has never played on a team that LeBron's played on in terms of championships. The only All-Star he played with was Scottie Pippen. Now, if you want to make the case that Scottie Pippen was far and head and shoulders ahead of everybody else that LeBron's played with, what about Dwayne Wade in 2011? Dwayne Wade was pretty good in 2011, and he didn't get the job done.
Again, the biggest demerit of LeBron's career, no doubt about that, is 2011. Period. He's not, that is what he did in that finals. To this day, and I don't care how much rings he wins going forward before he retires, that series is unforgivable.
Okay. And what about Kyrie Irving in the 2016 finals? Or the 2017 finals? Averaged 30 points per game in both series.
But again, you know, and this is not a knock on Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving is big time personified, no doubt about that. But they're not even in that position to win a game without LeBron doing the legwork, period.
Sure.
Even my son agrees with that. See?
No, he's disagreeing. That sounded like protest to me.
No. Changing the narrative again, buddy.
Yeah. No. All I'm saying is context has to be applied. So whilst you're right, Jordan probably didn't go through a team like Golden State, but he went through teams every step of the way to the playoffs. And let's not forget that LeBron did not beat Golden State with Kevin Durant on it. He beat a team with Steph Curry playing terrible, probably the biggest black eye of his career. Klay Thompson not showing up in the finals. Draymond Green getting suspended. Andrew Bogut getting hurt. And Harrison Barnes, I don't think anybody's seen him since that 2016 finals where he went AWOL as well. So it wasn't like this Herculean thing that LeBron did up against Golden State, or even up against the Spurs. He wasn't that effective until Game 6 and Game 7. And he needed, obviously, Chris Bosh to bail him out with those offensive rebounds and Ray Allen hitting that corner three.
Well, like I said, I'm not saying I disagree with you. I'm just saying it's the whole idea is not an argument is ludicrous to me. Anyway, I gotta let you go. I gotta change this boy's diaper.
That's fine.
Anything to plug? Anything to plug?
Nothing to plug, man. Just listen to the podcast if you want. You can disagree with me and then be offended. I'm not going to lose any sleep over it.
I still got to hear I'm one behind. I got to listen to the top 10 all-time players podcast. I started a couple days ago, but I didn't finish it yet.
Oh, that's fine. I want you to come on mine and we'll debate our top 10.
Okay, work it out. Next couple weeks, we'll work it out, definitely. Okay, right. I owe you big time for this.
No worries, man.
Good job, man. That was good, man. That was really good.
Thank you.